All right, so now I'd like to call up Mike Galt of GuardTime. You want that, Mike? That's the clicker to change slides.
Hi, everyone. Thanks a lot for inviting us here today. We're really glad to be here. I'm Mike Galt. I'm the CEO and co-founder of GuardTime. This is Tim Fitzpatrick, the CFO and head of alliances. So GuardTime was born in Estonia. Estonia is the most wired country on the planet, where 98% of transactions are done online. In 2007, the banks were subject to a national-level cyber attack. And it became evident during those attacks that the attackers were on the inside as well as in the outside. And so the question was asked, how can you rely on electronic data if insiders and outsiders can access that data, change it, and hide their tracks? And so GuardTime was formed to solve that problem. How can you rely on electronic data? So here's the industry model for information security. We put up perimeters around the data. We protect the data. But the problem is, there's no mechanism to validate the data. So insiders can change the data and hide their tracks. And 50% of banking fraud is conducted by insiders. And what about regulators, courts, and auditors? They all have to rely on trusted insiders to validate that those transactions are authentic. When the data leaves the perimeter, all these problems occur because we lack a simple mechanism to validate electronic data.
Okay, basically, what we do, we take three things. We take the data itself, we take the time to the second that the data was created, and we take the origin entity of the data and combine all that information, every 1 and 0 in the bits, into a digital fingerprint through a hash. And in the future, at any point, you can go back and check that fingerprint to determine whether any of these elements has changed. A single bit in the document, the time, or the origin entity of the document. With that, any financial institution can very easily implement this solution within a matter of hours. It's just a simple download and plug in, and you can take it to sign any data file that you use in your business.
So maths is beautiful. And this is fundamental innovation because no longer do you need to rely on any trusted third party or key to validate the data. The keyless signature means in 30 years' time, if you want to validate that transaction, if you want to prove that transaction is real, you can do it using only mathematics. And that's something completely new. So previously, if you wanted to do this, you would use PKI. Now, PKI is wonderful for identity management. But for data validation, it's really hard to do well because you need to manage the keys for the lifetime of the data. And that's really hard to do. Just ask the guys at RSA. So GuardTime represents fundamental innovation, that we're trying to change the way electronic data is created and used. And all of a sudden, reliable data becomes easy, effortless, and massively scalable. So here's an example of SEB Bank and Rakuten Bank in Japan. It's the largest online bank. So they sign their logs with GuardTime keyless signatures. So every transaction, every internet banking transaction, every payment is signed with GuardTime. And that allows them to prove afterwards that that data has not been tampered with, either by insiders or by outsiders. They can present that data to the courts, to the regulators, and everybody knows that's the real data, not fake or tampered data. So every night they run a process to validate the red flag. Is this data real? Has this data been tampered with? Is the time of transaction different from the time of signature? And using that, you can run a process to validate the trades. And so here's a really simple example of how this data keyless signature works. You can see here at Rakuten, e-invoicing. Invoice fraud is a big problem. So here's an invoice which has a signature. You open it up, and you can see three things. The integrity, the data hasn't changed. The origin of the data, which branch did this data come from? And you can also validate the time. And the independent verification is the maths I was talking about. This allows you to verify without any exposure to GuardTime or any third party that this transaction is real. And so we believe we represent an opportunity to SWIFT. Currently, they target 19 million transactions a day. We can take that to 1 billion transactions a day. internet banking. All these payments can come with the same level of validation. Okay, our vision, our team consists, we have 90 years of banking experience between us. We have a founder of VeriSign, is our chairman.
Thank you very much.
Got to call it. Thank you. All right. Can we have Mike?
Question.
You want to stay for questions?
Marcus.
Yeah, if you're using this in a transaction context, you're putting payments through a payment infrastructure. How do you carry that signature through different systems and different components?
Yeah, great question. So it really depends on the format the transaction is being stored in. So whether it's XML or PDF or whatever localized data format that is, it's very easy to integrate the signature into any format. So it travels with the data wherever that data goes. Anyone can validate it at any point in time.
Gotham.
Just to follow up on that question, does that mean that all banks' internal systems have to change to validate that signature as the data flows across?
Absolutely not, absolutely not. I think for the integration is so easy that it's a few lines of code. Let's say at SEB where every ATM transaction in Estonia is signed, right? It's after the transaction is complete. So when that transaction is being stored, it's a few lines of code which means sign this data. So it's a really simple integration.
So validation I'm talking about, not storing.
Sorry? Yeah, validation can happen offline or online. So you have some data, you have a signature. So you can verify it online using GuardTime service, or you can verify it offline. You can even use pencil and paper if you wanted to. It might take you a few million years, but you could do it with a pencil and paper.
Yeah, that is exactly my question. So the systems will have to change.
Well, you only need to validate the data when you want to.
So the answer is no. We can go in further later as to why the answer is no. It's very, very simple, very light, very elegant.
There is one last question there.
I know when you're focused on the next 2 or 3 years, it's very hard to look out to when you're a mature company. But cast your mind forward to when you're a mature company. Who will be your biggest customer?
Our vision is to go to market with the biggest technology companies. So GuardTime is, eventually, we want to be a universal de facto standard for all electronic data. So that means Microsoft or IBM or Google are naturally using this. And of course, our friends at Swift. Our pitch to Swift is, let us try this together. Let's see how GuardTime can help Swift get at those other 1 billion transactions a day.
He is the CEO, he's not me. So
All right.
Thank you very
Thanks.
much, guys.
Thanks.